Let's begin. We are on Daf Chaf He Amud Aleph, and we are starting the Mishnah. So we talked about already before this idea of having the Pisukim translated, and generally that's a very good thing because then people really, they know what's going on. Now the Gemara is going to discuss scenarios where maybe that's not necessarily what's going on, and we'll talk about what those things represent, and as well, I think a very powerful follow-up question that's going to come out of it. The Gemara says, Ma'aseh Reuven nikra velo mitagem. The story of Reuven in the Torah, okay, we read it, but velo mitagem, you don't translate that story. What's the story of Reuven? The story of Reuven, as we talk about, right, that it says, the Pasuk seems to say that Reuven took the concubine of his father, okay? Which obviously is very, shocking and provocative, and entirely not in character for Reuven at all. And the Gemara says that actually, what do we know? What happened with Reuven? What happened was, it's not that he lay with Bilhah, but rather that once Rachel died, so Yaakov used to he would have a rotation that he was with, spend time with all of the wives that he had at the time, and but his main place was with what he considered his main wife, which is the wife that he was trying to marry from the beginning, which was Rachel. Okay, once Rachel passed away, so it was moved to the space of Bilhah, which was Rachel's Pilege, which was Rachel's Ama, who then married Yaakov, but married Yaakov as a Pilegesh, okay? Sorry? So either way, okay, so what happened? So in that scenario, when Yaakov married Bilhah to be able to have the Shevatim, to have the children from her, so they moved the main space to be by her. Reuven took umbrage. He thought that this was not respect for his mother, that's where it should be. So he involved himself and he moved the main place where Yaakov would sleep, to the tent of his mother, trying to, so to speak, stand up for his mother's honor or placement, if you will, in the hierarchy. But since the pasuk it reads it in such a way where it castigates Reuven as if he had done something very, very bad. So therefore, to translate it literally, because that's what the Meturgeman does, he translates, and Reuven translates it into Aramaic, right? So the people who maybe were not learned or who didn't know enough about Torah might take it literally, and then that would cause for them to have this misunderstanding of the Torah and to have such a tremendous negative view about Reuven. So therefore, when we read Reuven, even in a time when they used to translate pasuk by pasuk, what would they do? We would skip the translation of Reuven.
Wouldn't that raise more suspicion for the for the people?
It might, but at the same time, they just didn't speak the language, those people. So in other words, if you could not be bothered to learn the Hebrew of the Torah, then when the Hebrew is a little bit out, needs to be explained and understood, and it's not translated, so if you're going to take the time to go and find out what it meant, you'd have to ask someone who was already knowledgeable. That's the point. We've created, remember we had this idea that we're worried about someone who's going to get, who's going to have a misconception about the fact that there's only 2 Pesukim left in the chapter, right? So the Gemara said, well, is that true about the guy who comes in late or the guy who leaves early? And we saw a difference in the Gemara. The guy who leaves early, he sees 2 Pesukim, he's like, oh, I guess you could read 2 Pesukim. And he has no one to ask. The guy who's in shul and he sees 2 Pesukim, what does he do? He goes to the guy next to him and he asks, and then they'll tell him, oh, don't worry, we're going to read we're going to read one extra pasuk, okay? So when the guy has to ask, he's already asking someone who knows. Exactly, but when you're reading it, so then that's already a different situation. The Gemara continues and says, Ma'aseh Tamar, Nikra u'mitagem. The story of Tamar, actually we do read and we translate it. So that's a strange thing, because again, we're in a situation where it seems like what Yehuda did was maybe not appropriate, right? He sees Tamar, she's presenting herself as if she's a woman of the streets, and he comes and he seems to be propositioning her. So why are you reading that part? How come you're doing that? But the answer is, we do read and translate the story of Tamar with Yehuda. Maaseh Egel Harishon Nikra U'Mitargem. The story of the Egel Harishon, the first Egel, we read it and we translate it. However, when it comes to the Hasheni and the second one, we'll see in a minute, what's this second Egel? Okay, the second Egel, we read it, but we don't translate it. So for some reason, we're not worried about the reading, the first time we experience the reading of the Egel, that we do translate, but the second time around, we don't read it. And the commentator is already going to explain to us what's the difference between the first reading and the second one. The first Egel and the second Egel. Let's take a look for 1 second. Rashi says, Maaseh Egel Harishon, Kol Parashat Egel ad v'ashlicheu ba'esh, until I threw it into the fire. Uma shechazar Aaron, but when Aaron repeats the story back, so that's the second narrative of the Egel, not the second Egel, v'siper Maaseh, hu karui Maaseh Egel Hasheni, that's called the second Egel, shekatuv bo v'yitzeh ha'egel hazeh, and this Egel, this calf, came out. We're worried to translate it, because maybe people will say, V'yomru, mamash hayabo shiatza me'elav. How did the Egel come out of the fire? It was acting on itself. Aval mikra en mevinim. They don't understand that what they mean is that the Egel emerged from the fire by things that people had done to be able to get it to emerge from the fire.
Right, their desires.
The ratzon, or the tablet of Micha that he threw into the fire, right? So there's different things that would have got it to come out of the fire. But if you read it that way and you're just translating to someone who doesn't know anything, how are they listening to that? What are they hearing? They're hearing, it sounds like, about an egel, an egel that has its own power, and that will be very damaging, especially in a time of idol worship. So for that, we read, but we don't translate it. Bekat Kohanim. So again, even though the first time also is a very negative story about the Jewish people, that they worship the golden calf. So what are we trying to stay away from? Are we trying to stay away from things that seem negative and will cast something in a bad light? Or are we trying to stay away from things that maybe might make people make mistakes? Because it's kind of like with Reuven, right? What are we worried about? They'll mistranslate it, and then what? And then they'll think badly of Reuven. So the fact that it casts Reuven in a bad light, incorrectly bad light, we're like, no.
It doesn't change the behavior of the people that are listening.
And why the other one does?
Because theoretically, you could say that someone else has a power, like some other being has a power.
But I'm saying, as an example, when it comes to Yehuda, we read it and we translate it. But so maybe someone's going to learn, if that was okay for Yehuda,
It's okay for me.
it's okay for me. Right? I could imagine that would be very, very dangerous. All right? So we're not yet sure, we don't yet have a grip on why this yes, this not, this is read and translated, this is read. Now we're going to get to a second stage. Birkat Kohanim, and this, by the way, is why the Mishnah doesn't just say, Eno metargemin, we don't translate. Because obviously, what does it mean you don't translate? It means that you're reading it, but you're not translating it. So why does it need to say, you read and you translate? Because of the second part of the Mishnah. Second part of the Mishnah continues. It says, Birkat Kohanim, Maaseh David ve'Amnon, Nikraim v'lo metargemin. The blessing of the Kohanim and the story of David and Amnon, all right, both of those, we read them and we don't translate them. Now, when it comes to Birkat Kohanim, why are we not reading Birkat Kohanim? What's wrong with Birkat Kohanim? Sounds like that should be something we should translate. We're already seeing the Gemara why Birkat Kohanim has this idea applied to it as well. Maaseh David ve'Amnon, that we already know, is a very spicy story. It's a tragic story also. The story with Amnon, who tells David to send him his half-sister. He pretends like he's sick. She comes to visit him. He effectively, shuts the door. He rapes her in the story. It's horrible, right? It's incest. It's rape. It's disturbing what goes on. In the end, Avshalom, who is Tamar's full brother, winds up killing killing Amnon, who is his half brother, for what he's done to his sister. Okay, but we don't read. What's it called? We don't read that story. Why don't we read that story? Is it just because it's too much? We'll already see exactly what it means that we don't read that story.
Read it at all.
No, we'll see. That's already what the Gemara is going to answer. Okay? So we read them, v'lo metargeminan, and we don't translate. Ein maftirim merkava, says the Gemara. Now we come to a second level. Ein maftirim merkava. We don't read the haftarah of the merkava at all. What's the haftarah of the merkava? The merkava is when we describe the heavenly throne, the inner workings of how Shamayim works, about the angels, about God's glory. So that's like the highest of the high. And that also requires only specific students of a specific pedigree to be able to learn Ma'aseh Merkava.
That's in the Navi?
That's in the Navi, but we don't read it as a haftarah. Okay?
But there's many stories in Nevi'im that we don't read as a haftarah.
Right, but it's not that we don't read them because we don't read them, it's that you can't read them. So in other words, in a scenario where you are attaching a haftarah to any week, as we said, why do we start reading haftarah in the Torah, in the Beit Knesset? Because they couldn't read the Torah, so they chose parts of the Torah that were related to those parts, and then they gave them. Why didn't they put, as an example, when God reveals himself at Mount Sinai, the story of Maaseh Merkava, the inner workings? The answer is, because you're not allowed to read the Merkava as a haftarah. Rabbi Yehuda Matir. Rabbi Yehuda says that we are allowed to. And in fact, if you ever remember a haftarah that talks about the Kisei HaKavod and the angels and how everything looks and how everything works, we do read that. We read it on Shavuot. I always said, you read it first day Shavuot, everyone's half asleep, no one's paying attention. Okay, fine. I feel like that's a nice pshara right there.
True story.
Between it's the most complicated, highest haftarah of the whole year. And they're like, you know what? Perfect idea. Let's have everyone stay up all night.
So they can't concentrate.
And then they're like, even the guy reading is falling asleep. Exactly. Okay.
They used to translate the Haftarah the way they translated the Torah.
Yeah, they would read it with a Meturgaman. But here it's saying not even that. Okay? We're not reading the Merkava Bichlal. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, but we do. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, En Maftirim Behodat Yerushalayim. We don't read the what's it called? The Haftarah of Let Yerushalayim Know, because in that Haftarah we're describing all of the terrible things that were happening in Yerushalayim prior to the destruction, and it's like in terms of the Isurim, how bad the people had sunk, how low they had sunk. So we feel like why do we need to be prosecuting these people and repeating over and over the terrible sins that they did? Why are we doing that? That's not what we need to do. And we'll come back to this as well. Says the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, Yesh Nekarin u'mitargemin. There are parts that we read and we translate. Yesh Nekarin v'lo mitargemin. There's parts that you read and then you don't translate, like we said in the Mishnah. Yesh lo Nekarin v'lo mitargemin. And there's some that you don't read and you don't translate, like we just saw Maaseh Merkava and Rabbi Eliezer of En Maftirim Behodat Yerushalayim. Elu Nekarin mitargemin. These are the ones that you read and you translate. Balat, Akan, Nashfa, Siman. So he gives us three and four, which totals up to 10 specific portions, right, that are in the Braita. And not only are they read, but they're also translated. So what do these things stand for? So Bet stands for Maaseh Bereshit, Nikra Umitagem. So when we read the beginning of the Torah, we're reading literally about the acts of creation. So one might think, that's a little bit dangerous because someone doesn't understand how this was created, what happened. In the beginning, God created. Doesn't mean that God was created by the beginning, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, the halacha is, the Mishnah Braita tells us, no, Maaseh Bereshit, you read it and you translate it. Gemara says, Pshita, why? Why would I not read it? Mahu the tema, I would think, atu lishayule, that people start to ask questions, male mala, male mata, what is above and what is below? What does that mean, what is above and what is below? What it means is what's going on in the highest workings of heaven, what goes on in between heaven and earth. So in other words, we're causing people in a very simplistic, we're not worried, Judaism is not worried about deep questions. But we are worried about deep questions by people who don't have patience for the answer. We're worried for a guy, you have that all the time in the rabbinics. Guy comes, asks you a very complicated question. He's like, just give me the, I want the one sentence. Mutar asur. I'm sorry, I can't answer you. You're asking a question on karet. Like if you do it, the Torah says you're going to die and your children are going to die. Right? It's the worst sin ever. And all you want to know is like, no, just cut to the chase, Rabbi. I don't want the context. I don't want the background. Am I allowed to do it or not? No. Calm down. Let me explain to you. This is what it means. This is what that. This is what the Chachamim was saying. This is where they were coming from. This case that you're suggesting, there's some that say that it's like this, and there's some that say like this. So you're trying to ask me a question. I'm going to give you an answer, especially on a complicated and a question that has very high ramifications. So, what we're not willing to do is have people who are asking questions about the chayot, about the highest angels in the highest heavens and what came before them. And when are they asking it? On Shabbat morning when the guy translated the verse into English, and now you're going to come in and ask it. You schedule a class with your local Orthodox mikubal, make sure that he's religious and he's kosher, because many of them are not. But the one that is, sit down and you want to learn, okay, fine, learn the background. Right? But to think to yourself that because you got an English verse translated in English, and now you know the whole Torah, and that's sacrilege. Okay, it's disrespect, and it's treating something very, very, very heavy, right? Without the, I always say, imagine a guy, you have a big electrical thing, you touch the electrical current, you're going to die. So someone says, you want to do it? Here's the manual. This is how you. The guy says, I don't want to read the manual. Just he opens up the book. He finds in the book where it says safe. Okay, I saw the book. It said safe. You picked one word out of the whole manual. How do you know that relates to that switch or to that scenario? You touch this, you can get electrocuted. But that doesn't stop people from applying that exact same scenario to opening up a stone chumash and saying, look, Rabbi, from what I'm seeing here, are you joking? You see what I'm saying? It's very important to understand that there are things that are very deep, and that's what the Gemara over here is communicating with the Chayot. We're worried that people will ask that question. We're not afraid of the question. We're afraid of the question when all you have to go on is the one sentence translation that you just heard from the guy who translated the pasuk into Aramaic. You don't speak Hebrew. You're not willing to sit and learn about it. You want to know on that one sentence if you could understand how the angels work and God's throne in the Shamayim, what came before, what came after, how does creation devolve down to this world, Uma lifnim, Uma le'achor, and what came before and what will come after. Now I want to just take 1 second with you because I think that these two words, these two expressions, I think are very telling. Because take a look. The first expression is ma lemala uma lemata. Okay? What's above and what's below. So we have over here Likutei Rashi. You see the last line on the actual page in Hebrew. Ma lemala mirakia sha'al rashi achayot.
Here, Rabbi?
You see the bottom line of the page.
Yeah.
If you go to the Hebrews, go back one page.
It's all the way down.
On
down,
the Hebrew,
down,
the
and
very,
Okay.
very bottom, the teeny letters.
So let me just explain what that is. On the right side of the Gemara is Rashi. The left side with the bold big words, that's Tosafot. Down the side of the left of the column, you have something called Likutei Rashi. What does that mean? Someone once told me, I never laughed so hard in my life, but I had to keep my face straight. I didn't want to insult him or embarrass him. He says, I only learn Likutei Rashi. I said, why? He said, because I'm Breslov. I was like, what?
How did you keep a straight face?
I was like,
joking?
what? He goes, my favorite book is Likutei Moharan. So he goes, I saw the Likutei Rashi. I knew that was like the Breslov Rashis. I was like, Likutei means gathered. That's what it means, like Likutei. Likutei Rashi is not Breslov, just to be clear. Likutei Rashi. Okay, that was one of my hardest.
I don't understand.
Likutei Rashi. I had one other one like that. I had another one. We asked the teacher in a girls' school, in a religious girls' school, why they don't teach Mishnah Berurah. And she replied, because we don't learn Mishnayot in girls' schools. I was like, wow, how are you a principal? Mishnah Berurah is the Chafetz Chaim on Halakha. It's like Halakha Lema'aseh for Ashkenaz for sure. So we asked her, why didn't they teach Mishnah Berurah? And her answer was, because we don't learn Mishnayot in the girls' school.
She was the anti-Stern College.
And she was the principal of the school. I was like, do you learn the Breslov Rashis? Okay, so Likutei Rashi is just the gathering of Rashis from all over Shas. This was one of the most unbelievable additions that was ever brought to the Gemara.
Wow.
What does it do? It finds Rashi on this same Gemara in some other Masechet. So if Rashi decided, for whatever reason, not to comment over here, and you're lost, what does Likutei Rashi do? It tells you that in Masechet, look at the last line, Chagiga Yud Aleph, Rashi does comment on what this means. Ma lemala, what is above? Merakia, from the heavens, Sha'al Rashei Chayot, above the heads of the Chayot, of the Chayot. What does Chayot mean? Chayot usually means the animals. But what are we talking about over here? The Chayot in Shamayim, right? Ve'ofanim. Sorry? The Hayot HaKodesh. Hayot HaKodesh means the holy Hayot, the angels on high, right? So what is Lemala? What is above the Rakia, which is above the heads of the Chayot? And the second question is Malemata Mehen. What comes underneath them? So in trying to understand, okay, I get it says that God created the heavens and the earth. I kind of know what the earth creation is, but what does the heavenly spheres look like? What is the inner workings? Yes, of the levels of the Shamayim, of the Sfirot, etc., etc. So we don't want a guy asking that on Shabbat morning when he has no background whatsoever. He doesn't speak Hebrew on Regel Achat exactly. Okay. Then the Gemara says, "Uma lefnim, uma leachor," and what comes before and what comes after. Let's go down to Likutei Rashi, our trusty friend at the bottom. Chutz lemechitzat harakia lemizrach, ma leachor lema'arav. What goes to the lifnim, to the innermost, and what goes to the outermost? So I asked you up, down, and now I'm going to ask you also, so to speak, right, inside, outside. What's all the way past the rakia on the east, and what do we have as well, lema'arav, on the west? Tosafot actually has a different understanding. Let's look at Tosafot. Ma lefnim ma la'achor, pirush, ma besov gvulei ha'olam lemizrach. What is out there in the furthest reaches of the planet to the east, u'lema'arav, and to the west? Inami, that's quoting Rashi. Inami ma haya kodem sheshet yimei bereshit. What happened before the 6 days of creation? U'ma yihye achar sheyichale ha'olam. And what will be after the world is destroyed? What will be before and what will be after? So Tosafot adds us another layer of the complicated questions that people are going to ask if you give them this English translation on one leg when you're reading Bereshit, okay? So that's what we might have been worried about. And yet what does the Braita tell us, right? Still, they are read and they're translated. So in other words, the Braita asks, why should I not have? The answer is, because this is something that might have been a concern, but actually, in truth, we actually read it and we translate it even though there is this question, Kamash Malan, that still we do that and we're not worried about those questions. Now, just to be clear, the Torah is not limiting critical thought. The Gemara discusses what is going to be after the world finishes.
The context of the moment.
Exactly, in the context of the moment. The Gemara discusses what was before Sheshet Yemei Bereshit, Gemara in Shabbat. Okay? So we have these discussions in the Gemara. But come back to the Bet Midrash, learn with us. When you have the time to see it, to understand it, to have a broad explanation addressing a broad topic, then fine. Otherwise, I would have thought that we're worried about that. Kamash Malan, we're not worried about it. You know what? We'll do it. Someone has a question, let them come forward. And I want to share something with you. After we go through these ideas, I want to share something interesting with you. Just please remind me to come back to this Bereshit. The Gemara continues. What's the second letter of the mnemonic of that which we read and translate? Maaseh Lot u'shnei benotav nikra u'mitagem. We read the story of Lot and his two daughters. Okay? Again, you'd think that that's something which is, a little bit salacious. Exactly. It's embarrassing. It's salacious. It's is that what you need to be reading in the Beit Knesset? In the synagogue. Why do we need to be talking about that? It's not even like he's not even one of the avot. Is that why should we do that? The Gemara says pshita. What do you mean? Of course we're going to read it. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Why wouldn't we read it? Why wouldn't we translate it? I would have thought nichush tichvodo to Avraham. We thought that you maybe would be cognizant of the kavod of Abraham, that this is a boy who grew up in his house, and look at how he's behaving. So you know what? We're not going to point out how terrible this act was, how abominable this act was for a man to sleep with his daughters, right? Kamash malan. Still, we don't hold back. We explain what happened, and in each of these scenarios, there's a reason why that the Torah. So again, let me just be clear. When the Torah writes it, so one would assume, so it's my obligation to read it, and maybe even to translate it. So when we say, you might have been worried about this, kamash malan, no. You learn that actually it's okay, we're not worried about it, we're going to say it, because it's in the Torah. You still have a second question to ask. But why is it in the Torah? Not why once it's in the Torah, aren't we worried about this?
Why is it there to begin with?
Why is it there to begin with? So obviously, in every one of these cases, we're learning a lesson. Okay? So there is a reason to read it, and by dint of the fact that there's a lesson to be learned by the fact that it was put in the Torah, there's also a reason for us to translate it, so that the person who doesn't understand will also learn that lesson. So what we're saying over here is that what we're worried about is maybe they would have learned a different lesson. So let's just, I don't want to go through, I don't know if we'll have time to go through each and every one of them, but just as an example, what damage would be if we learned this idea about Lot and the kavod of Abraham was damaged? What are we worried about? Are we worried about just that it's disrespect, it's not respect to Abraham, that Lot behaved this way? Abraham had lots of family members that did lots of terrible things.
Maybe then you would say that this is what Abraham taught.
Oh, so maybe the fact that there's a lack of kavod for Abraham because Lot behaved this way would cause you to not learn from Abraham in general. Because if this is who this guy is, do I really want to learn from someone who this is what someone in his house learned from him? Okay, so the answer is no. We expect the reader to at least be, or the listener in this case, to be at least as discerning, to be able to say, this Lot, who acted differently from Abraham, where did he pick this up from? Well, he spent time with Abraham, who everything we hear about Abraham is wonderful. And then he spends time with the people of Sodom. After he runs away from Sodom, this is his action. So where would you think that he learned that behavior from? Abraham or Sodom? We're expecting that at the very least the people will be able to differentiate and not have that be a problem.
But why do you assume that they could differentiate between this and not another episode?
So we haven't gotten to the other episodes yet. In the Gemara, so far, all we've done are things that you're reading and translating. We'll get already to when you'll read. I think I'm okay. We'll get to the point soon, hopefully, when we're going to explain the reading and the not translating. Okay, but we're not there yet. Gemara says, the story of Tamar and Yehuda, we read it and we translate it. Gemara asks again, Pshit, that's in the Torah. Why would I not translate it? The Gemara answers, I would think that we'd be cognizant of the kavod of Yehuda, that it seemed it casts him in a bad light. Kamash Malan, we learn Shivachehu de'odi. It is his honor, it is the praise of Yehuda that ultimately he admits.
Right. The teshuvah.
The teshuvah of Yehuda. You got to have the context of what happened, and therefore Shivachehu de'odi, it's his praise that he actually admitted it in the end, and he was willing to take that complete ownership and responsibility for it. So in order to be able to bring that Shivacheh, therefore we're willing even to have you misunderstand the beginning, because it's worth the lesson of later to have this, the first part of this come out in a way which might be misconstrued in a negative way.
Isn't that why he gets the to be the ruling.
So what Harry is saying is first of all is very correct, but it's very important. It's not just that. Look, okay, net, Yehuda comes out ahead because like he had this bad thing and now he's got this good character trait. It's not that there's a bad character and a trait potentially and a good one. So therefore, I don't mind people making a mistake about the bad one because I have to. At least you get the good one. That is the thing that defines Yehuda. Yehuda is literally the word modeh. So when the Gemara says Shivachehu de'odi, it's not just saying that we're saying his praise because he admitted, but Shivacheh, this is his praise. This is the greatness of Yehuda, because it is in that odeh, in that admitting, and in that taking ownership, that Yehuda becomes the king of Am Yisrael forever and ever. So therefore, we tell that story even if it's potential to be misunderstood. The Gemara continues. Maaseh Egel HaRishon Nikra Mitargem. We read the story of the Egel HaRishon, and we read it and we translate it. Again, we explained what the Egel HaRishon is, the first narrative that covers the Egel. The Gemara says, Pshita, obviously, why would you think not to read it? I would think, what do you mean? The Jewish people, that they all sinned, the story of the Egel, we don't need to read that and translate it. We could read it and we could learn about it, but not that someone who has no background or context in Judaism, to do that. I remember many times giving a class, and in the setup, you're giving a setup and you say you don't have to do this. Or, it's not important for a person to study Torah. But meanwhile, what am I saying? I'm saying it's not important for a person to study Torah if they're not going to follow through and learn from it. Let's say I'm saying such a statement. Okay, I'm not saying I would say. I'm saying if I did. Imagine a guy hears that and walks out. It's not important to study Torah. That's not what I'm saying. Right? It's a soundbite. It's literally. And by the way, it happens all the time. On the news, especially on the news, but even to rabbis. I went to shul today, you don't know. You know what the rabbi said? That's not what the rabbi said. That's what your ADD allowed you to hear from what the rabbi said. It's very challenging.
One of the most famous cases of that is the bike, right? The one source that allows the person to ride a bike. I think it was a rabbi in India or something like that had to do a mitzvah, whatever, this and that. And then it cut out and became you can ride a bike on Shabbat.
That's the Ben Ish Chai, yes. That is the Ben Ish Chai. But 100%. But there's so many cases. There's so many cases like this. There's a story. I'll give you an example. Okay. There's a case from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach ruled that in a case where someone is working with someone to make them more religious and to connect them, and they know, because they're experienced in this, that the only thing missing from this person's growth is for them to come to Shabbat. So if you're inviting the guy for Shabbat, and you know that that's the only thing, and you're doing all this other stuff, and you know that the one thing that he's still missing is just coming to experience Shabbat in person, so then if you invite him for Shabbat, and the guy is telling you, you don't tell him to drive, but you invite him for Shabbat, and you know that the guy is going to drive, right? Rav Shlomo Zalman said it would be mutar, right? Why? Because you're a person who has experience in this. Number two, you're a person who's going to make a Shabbat experience that's going to push him over the edge, and he's going to become Shomer Shabbat because of it. So in such a case, you'd be allowed to invite the person for Shabbat. And then he said, and please don't include it in my book. And please don't include it in my book. Why should you not include it in my book? Because someone's going to take it out of context and no. Anyway, after he died, what'd they do? They put it in the book. No. And not only did they put it in the book, they put it in the book without the caveat of the fact that the person is an experienced teacher of Torah and that the person's going to have a Shabbat experience. So now you have a person reads this and they're like, okay, yeah, you're allowed to invite someone to come for Shabbat. You know they're going to drive. Who said you're allowed to do that?
Terrible.
Who said you're allowed to do that? So again, in certain scenarios, but you have people that they're only going to listen to this and only going to listen to that. So that's what we're worried about, okay? So too over here, the Gemara says, why do we need to bash the Jewish people's biggest mistake? We need to read it every year. We need to talk about it, reinforce it. Someone honking?
No, they're looking for parking.
Okay.
It's the sensor.
It's a backup sensor. Okay. Very good. All right. Now, so the Gemara says, I would have thought that you'd be cognizant of the kavod for Israel. Kamash malan, kol sheken denicha lehu dehavya le kapara. Says the Gemara, no, the opposite. When you read about the story of the Jewish people and them making a mistake, how much more so because it actually the busha that comes to the Jewish people from reading about this mistake that we made actually brings kapara to the Jewish people for the sin that they made. I think as well, another way of understanding this is when you read this story, you also give people an understanding that, look, you could be so high and you could learn Torah not just from Rabbi Farhi and Rabbi Mizrahi, but from rabbis that are much bigger than us. You could learn Torah from God Himself on Mount Sinai. And if you're not careful, the Yetzer Hara will yank the chair out from right underneath you. And a person should never think that they are above the Yetzer Hara's temptations and be arrogant in who they are, but recognize, you know something, maybe I should stay away, I don't know, I don't want to put myself in a situation of temptation. So reading this story is a kapara, because when other people are better because of the cautionary tale of the egel immediately following the luchot, that becomes a kapara for the people of their sin of the egel, because through that sin, now other people are staying away and reading about it. Other people are staying away from the sin. So therefore we read it and we translate it. The Braita continues, Kilalot u'beachot. So what was the next one, if you remember? The Gemara gave us 10 mnemonics. Bet lamed taf. Bet lamed taf stands for Bereshit. Lamed stands for Lot. Taf stands for Tamar. Excellent. The fourth one is Ayin Egel. Okay, so we read the first Egel. Says the Gemara, what's the next one? After Ayin, Kuf. Kuf is Kilalot u'berachot. The curses and the blessings. Which curses and which blessings? What are we referring to? Sorry?
What's the parasha that it comes from?
The Kilalot u'berachot. Well, there's numerous Kilalot u'berachot. We have the famous Kilalot u'berachot. We have in Bechukotai. But we also have in Devarim, we have a repetition of those kilalot in Kitavo. All right, so you have these pesukim that are said, the kilalot and the berachot in these parashiyot. And the Gemara says, kilalot and berachot nikrim metagemin. It's the Gemara pshita, obviously. Ma'u detemanekos dilma paiga datayu detzibura. What do you mean? That's the whole point of the kilalot and berachot, as a warning. Answers the Gemara, a very difficult question answer. The Gemara says, no, we're worried that maybe the people, paiga datayu, they're going to become very overly concerned and overly nervous and anxious. I can't believe it. This is going to happen to me. That's going to happen to me. All these terrible things. And then they'll give up hope that they could actually survive. If I do these sins, all these terrible things are going to come. Forget it. I may as well give up now. So they're going to lose hope. And therefore, I would have thought that you don't read it and translate it. Kamash malan, you read it and translate it. Again, let's ask the question one more time. The point of the kilalot is as a deterrent. There's no deterrent if they don't know about it.
So why are we doing it to begin with?
Why? So if you're not going to read it and translate it, why?
What's the point?
What's the point of putting it in the pasuk?
Well, now when we're required to say, or they used to be required to say it every year and read them all.
So we are saying that you have to read it and translate it. The Gemara's question is, why should I not read it and translate it? Why should I not translate it? The Gemara answers, because maybe the people are going to get biflage. They're like, I can't believe what's going on over here. So that's very, very harsh. It's too much. I can't deal with it. And then they'll give up, and then they'll lose hope and they'll lose faith. So if that's the case, so why are we translating it? Gemara says, Kamash Malan, no, you have to read it. Maybe the Kamash Malan of the Gemara is, it's true, that's a risk we have to take. Because that's why the deterrent is there. That's one way of looking at the Kamash Malan. Okay? But I think that there's also something else to be found in the beginning of the Gemara. The Gemara's Hava Amina was that when you read these kilalot, that's very disheartening. Okay? You read the kilalot, it's terrible, very scary. The person's going to get turned off. Not for anybody, but for a person who doesn't speak Hebrew, the relationship with Judaism is so tenuous.
Fear-based.
So that what are you going to do? You're going to give that to them. They're not going to survive. So the Hava Amina was, you know what? They're not going to survive. But you see that the Gemara is willing to entertain this idea that even though the reason for the kilala was for that guy to hear it, still the Gemara is like, I don't know, should we say it? You see the Gemara, even when the Gemara decides that it's important to say, the Gemara is hesitating. And we have to learn from the sensitivity in that hesitation. How would you express that then? If you're going to read it, you're going to read it. If you're not going to read it, you're not going to read it. What does it mean that maybe you should, maybe you shouldn't? Okay, you know what? Say it. So what are we saying? What's the sum total?
Don't we say it low when we say the kilala?
Excellent. So you see that we're making some concessions in the saying that will take into account the hesitation. Why am I sharing this with you? Because I think that this is a lesson that goes far beyond this case. I just read a story, a beautiful story. I don't remember the rabbi that was with. Rabbi comes into someone's house and he sees two kids sitting in front of a Gemara. Little kids, they don't even know what they're talking about. They're sitting in Gemara. And one kid's looking at the Gemara and he's like, yeah. He's doing the tune that he hears, obviously. And the kid goes, Asur, Asur, Asur. The other kid goes, Asur, Asur, Asur. The other kid goes, Asur, Asur, Asur. They didn't know anything. They have no idea what they're saying. They're saying the Gemara. They're going to go. Anyway, the rabbi's like, where's the father of these kids? And they're all pointing it out. Everyone's like, oh, it's so cute. Look at them learning this, that. He calls the father. He says, that's what your kids got?
Everything's asur.
They don't know what the Gemara, but that's what they learned from you? Everything's asur? The question is asur. The statement is asur. The answer is asur. Everything is asur. How do you think the kid's going to relate to that? Isn't that powerful? So effectively, what we're learning over here, I think maybe also sheds light on that. The Gemara is saying, the whole point is for the guy who's doing the sin. We don't want him to do the sin, so we're telling you, do the sin, you can get punished. Now the Gemara is like, maybe I shouldn't say it. Really? Why should I say it? Because maybe it'll scare him off. Good! The answer is, yes, but.
It's like you always say about kids in shul.
Yes.
Always.
About kids in shul, but also about scaring the people.
I had that happen.
You have people say all the time, give it to me straight. You know what I want to say to them? You can't handle the truth. Okay.
Isn't like in Sukkot, don't we read or the Ashkenazim read a Haftarah or some book,
Kohelet.
That's some it was
heavy
really,
duty
it
stuff.
was heavy. I couldn't take it.
We don't translate it though. We just read it without translating it.
By the way,
I was so
can
upset.
I'll tell you
I
why.
didn't go to
Let me tell you.
He's afraid to go into Sukkot.
it was so ridiculous.
Let me tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because you did what we're talking about. You read the English translation.
Yeah.
Totally.
But
What am I supposed to do?
Stanley sat and learned it with the rabbi. It's beautiful. When you learn.
Context, I
Sorry?
actually read it myself first, took notes, and the first class I went to the rabbi, he goes, please rip this up and never show this to anybody.
Big man for sharing, Yehuda.
That's the truth. That's the truth.
That's
And
awesome,
then I
Stanley.
learned it, and I fell in love.
Wow.
Can I tell you, if you read
Yeah.
Kohelet,
Beautiful.
if you read Kohelet plain,
You got your work cut out for you.
it's the most
Jump off a
depressing,
The
Yeah.
most depressing thing.
so depressing,
Jump.
and what's it
Yeah.
called?
Yeah.
And it's just all it is. It's written like an emo teenager.
Yeah.
Writing
Angry.
about,
Yeah.
writing on angry emo teenager.
Everything's worthless.
Right? Nothing
Don't
is.
do
There's no
anything.
point in life.
There's no meaning
Everybody's
to life.
fake.
Not worth living.
Everyone's fake. Nobody's a real friend. Love is a joke. Right? It's like it's wild.
Yeah. Don't
But
read
but
it.
then
I didn't say that.
when you read it with the commentaries,
Inspiring.
it's very inspiring.
Yeah.
And it's again, it's like
The
everything.
opposite of what you would think it is.
Wow.
It's like everything else. It's what it's like. Imagine someone goes and gets drunk with wine, and they're off their face or tequila shots, off their face and like, this is a lie, and they're ripping off their shirt and jumping on the table. In that moment, imagine someone came to you and said, "This is fake. This is not joy. This is worthless. You're embarrassing yourself. You're causing damage to your future reputation." At that moment, you look at this guy. You're like, "You're such a party pooper. You just ruined happiness."
Right.
What Kohelet is actually trying to do is saying, when you sober up, you're going to realize that this was ridiculous. I made a fool of myself. I lost my job. I lost the respect of my colleagues and of my family. And what I thought was happiness was just dopamine, was just this serotonin being released because I was on a drunken rampage. And actually, if someone was my friend, I wish they would have given me musar. And that's Kohelet. It's like, who's a good friend? Someone who tears you in half.
Amazing.
That's action. That is literally what Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo was like, I've had it all. And let me tell you what real joy is, because this is not real joy. And then he spends time deconstructing illusory joy. That is Kohelet in 2 sentences. Thank you.
This is gonna bring fireball shots. We're good.
You know why? No one thinks fireball shots are happiness.
I know one guy that
The only happiness we have when you give someone fireball shots in the crew is watching the guy's discomfort when he has to drink it.
We got a guy named Fireball Phil.
A fireball Phil Shema Israel. That's a guy. I feel like that's a really fun guy, by the way. No, I feel like I want a friend called Fireball Phil. That's not. All right. So maybe if you introduce me, then your friend will be my friend. Okay. Let's continue. So the Gemara says, Azharot ve'onashin nikrin u'mitargemin. So what happens when it comes? So those are the kilalot and the berachot that we described in the 2 parts of the Torah. What about azharot and onshin, which means when the Torah warns you, don't do this, this is the punishment. That's different than the kilalot. The kilalot are like a string of when you guys leave Hashem and everything, then this and this and this is going to happen, and that's going to happen, this is going to happen, and the people are going to come, and the country is going to be under siege, etc., etc., etc. Azharot is the person who does this. This is the punishment. The makeh avivi imo mot yumat, etc., etc. So the warnings and the punishments we read and we translate. Fascinating. Remember I told you how sometimes you could learn everything from the Hava Amina of the Gemara? What does the Hava Amina mean? Hava Amina means I would have thought. What the Gemara's first impression is, sometimes teaches you a blowout lesson. Says the Gemara, I tell you in the Torah, I'm warning you, don't do this, this is the punishment. Why did the Torah tell that to you? So that you would warn him and that he would realize that there's a punishment. Why would you not read that? Why would you not translate that? Listen to what the Gemara says. I would have thought, Nechush Dilma atu le'me'en bat miyira. Maybe the guy then, he's going to do the mitzvah out of fear of the punishment. Gemara says, look, end of the day, if the Torah said it, so then we've got to explain it, because then. But look how careful the Gemara is telling you. I need to tell you in a braita, you're going to translate it, because we need to be very careful about building fear-based Judaism. Look at this, Hava Amina of the Gemara. Now, let me be clear. What do you learn from the Maskana, though?
You still need it.
The Maskana is, still has to be there in the right way, in the right time.
Good chinuch lesson.
Yeah, you see that? The Torah was not written for people who want quick answers. Complex things, you could explain them, you could break them down to their, composite parts, but then they're in their composite parts. You didn't explain the whole thing in that short explanation. You explained that slice of it. Okay? Let's continue.
Why do we even have the Mishnah without the Gemara? That kind of feels like that.
No, because remember, the whole point of Torah Sheba'al Peh was we wanted the explanations. Right. So when you learn Mishnah, no one learned the Mishnah like the Mishnah. They learned the Mishnah and then they learned the Gemara, but they just didn't have it written.
No, I understand, but I'm saying even in today's day, right?
Yeah.
You have people that, we spoke about this, like just Mishnah.
So anyone who's learning Mishnayot is learning it with the Gemara. How are they doing that? Because the commentators are, when you're translating the Mishnah, they're already building in the Gemara's.
It's condensed.
Yeah, it's condensed, and it's trying to give you the condensed overview version. Okay, but you're right. So that would be the point. The point would be to study the Mishnayot, and then to do it. If you look, there's classic commentators. Then there's more like a commentary for dummies, which was just an unbelievable work. Unbelievable work is the Mishnayot Kehati. Unbelievable. The amount of work that went into Mishnayot Kehati is not to be believed, because he's tried to weave. You have the app. Yeah, amazing. They've woven into the Mishnah the Gemara. So in other words, as they're translating, Rabbi Meir says from sunrise, and sunrise here is to be understood as, and sometimes they're taking 2 pages of Gemara and just saying, and the end of that Gemara thing is that Rabbi Meir says like this, and that's what Rabbi Meir's opinion is.
It's a lifetime's work.
tremendous amount of work in Kahati.
In English?
Is that yeah? They have
Yeah,
they have the
app
whole
has
set.
Hebrew and
The
English
app has
commentary.
English.
It's incredible.
It is really special. The Kahati. Okay, now let's continue. Says the Gemara, Maaseh Amnon v'Tamar. The story of Amnon and Tamar, Nikra u'mitargem. We read it and we translate it. Maaseh Avshalom Nikra mitargem. So the Gemara over here is adding an aleph because let's look again. What do we have? Bereshit, Lot, what's it called? Tamar, Egel, Kilalot. What's the noon? Has the noon onashim? It's a strange way of saying noon. I'm not sure. Okay? I'm not sure why the noon is onashim. But oh, that's why. Because you already have an ayin.
You can't reuse
Oh,
the
so
letter.
yeah.
You can't reuse the letter. Sorry? I'm guessing that's why it's noon. Okay? Either way. Noon, no, that undoes my theory. Super quick, slug up, like they say. All right, so I'm not sure why is onashim noon. Let's see, does anyone talk about that?
On the first page, no, I didn't see any.
Usually when you have a mnemonic like that, Rashi will tell you what each one of them is.
What does Onashim mean?
Punishments.
Sorry?
Onashim is punishment.
Onashim is punishments, yeah. I'm not sure why.
41 in English just says Bereshit and Lot. It doesn't give you anything else.
Okay, they cut out before the contentious. All right. All right, let's see. Well, maybe I'll try and figure it out later. Okay? So, either way, the Gemara says Onashim. Onashim is Nun, right? Then we have, after Onashim, we have Amnon v'Tamar. So then why that's not there either?
Oh, do you have Tamar and after Bereshit and Lot?
This is a different Tamar. Okay. Well, I guess we'll come back to it. All right, let's see. So the Gemara says, Maaseh Amnon v'Tamar nikra mitargem. Maaseh Avshalom nikra mitargem. Both of these, we read them and we translate them. Pshita, why do you have to tell it to me? Obviously, the Gemara answers, we're worried about the honor of David. The Gemara says, Kamash Malan. In the end, Kamash Malan, we say no. Now, it's actually interesting. In the story of Avshalom, what's the difference between the story of Avshalom and Amnon? Amnon's story is with Tamar, is David's daughter. So where is the black eye? It's on Amnon, and it's on Amnon really. It's not on David.
It's not on the tzaddik.
It's not on the tzaddik. I mean, maybe the thing you could say is that David, maybe people will say that that's that this, I can't believe this is his kid, that this is what his kid's done.
Abraham.
Yeah, but that's not directly about him. The second one, Avshalom, is that Avshalom actually took his father's concubines and he had relations with them. He was trying to unseat his father. So he was showing that he was the king. He was doing things that the king would do, so to speak. All right. So that's Yikareh David. That's the glory, the honor of David that was being impinged. Okay. So again, I'm also pointing out that in the other scenarios, what did it say? Lechosh, we should be worried about kivodo of Abraham, kivodo of this one, kivodo of the Jewish people, kivodan of the Jewish people. Here it comes to David and we use a different word. Did you notice that? Yikareh de David. So we use a different terminology when it comes to David HaMelech. And I think that the idea over here is communicated because whereas with Abraham and with Yisrael and with other cases of kavod, that kavod is just a kavod for someone who was. Here, the yakar of David being impinged causes a lack of kavod and adherence to the current king of Israel. So there's a very particular and immediate relationship which can get ruined by, right? Because we have kings all throughout Jewish history potentially. and leaders, the Rashi Galut, also from the tribe of David. So impinging on David's honor also impinges upon them. Let's continue. The Gemara says, "Maaseh Pilegish Begivah Nikra Mitagem." The story of Pilegish Begivah is a terrible, terrible, terrible story in the Navi, but Lemaaseh we read it and we translate it. What's the story of the Pilegish Begivah? Again, we have a story of basically a concubine that was taken advantage of by a multitude of people. She came back. She was so broken over it. Anyway, in the end, when she dies, the people are so overwhelmed by what's happened that they take, in order to illustrate, to make this point, they wind up taking pieces of this woman and mailing them, so to speak, to all the different people to say, look, this is your responsibility. Look at what you did to this woman.
This is where?
This is in the time in Eretz Israel, Pilegish Begivah. And Binyamin was not willing to take ownership over this terrible act that some of its people, yeah, in the Navi.
Where in the Navi?
It's right there. It's in Melachim. Melachim Yutet. Okay? Shoftim Yutet. And the Gemara says over there that they were not willing to take ownership. So the nations of Eretz Israel were so overcome by the moral repugnancy of that being done that they actually attacked Binyamin and they went to war against Binyamin. The tribes of Israel went to war against tribes of Binyamin. And they precluded Binyamin from marrying into the Jewish people. The first edict.
Whoa.
They signed an edict, no Jew is allowed to marry the whole tribe of Binyamin.
Isn't that crazy? Because didn't we learn that Binyamin was one of the few people that never sinned?
On a personal level.
I know that. I'm just saying.
There was people from,
It got so bad that they said, we won't marry you.
Yeah, so we won't marry the kids. And then, if you remember, we discussed in Masechet Ta'anit.
As we learned it, you didn't say that.
We learned in Masechet Ta'anit that we learned about days that are sad and we learned about days that are happy. And one of the happy days, if you remember, was the day that the tribes started marrying back into the tribe of Binyamin. When the situation finally was cleared up and Binyamin rose back to the level where they were accepted again in the Jewish people, and that signified a level of shalom coming together amongst the Jewish people. But you'd think that Pilegish Begivah, you shouldn't read Pshita. Why not? I would think that Binyamin, a person who never sinned, that we should be talking that way about his children, reflects so badly upon him. And the Gemara answers, Kamash Malan, that we'd rather to let people know about human nature and how a person can sink, and how also the Jewish people responded, how they responded to that. The Braita says, Hoda et Yerushalayim et to'avotea, let Jerusalem know all the terrible things that it did, as we explained already before, that in the precursor to the Churban. So we talked about all the sins that they used to do in Yerushalayim. The Gemara says, Pshita, why do you have to tell me that you read it and translate it? I would have thought that that's obvious. The Gemara says, La fukim de Rabbi Eliezer. No, we're coming against the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that you can't read that portion as a haftarah. The Tanya, Maaseh b'adam echad, there was a certain person, Shaya, koreh lemala Rabbi Eliezer. He was reading in front of Rabbi Eliezer, Hodat Yerushalayim et to'avotea. Amar lo, Rabbi Eliezer said, before you're talking about all the abominations of Yerushalayim, go look at the abominations of your own mother. They looked into the guy and they found out that the guy's lineage was, he was more mailman than. They found that she was someone that committed adultery, had adulterous relationships. Now, it's a funny thing. Think about it. It's a funny thing. The Gemara is telling you Rabbi Eliezer has another opinion. You don't read. The Chachamim say that you do read it. The guy follows the opinion of the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer comes down on him like a ton of bricks. You might want to have a serious conversation with your mom.
That's where the line comes from.
It's like what? And then it turns out that the Chachamim say that Rabbi Eliezer understood that in my synagogue, I have this ruling. A guy could come and do the opinion of the Chachamim. There's a brazenness there. He said there's a brazenness, there's a chutzpah there that I know must mean that comes from somewhere. There's got to be something in this person. Why? Because one of the elements of the lineage of a kosher Jew is baishanim, that they have that sense of shyness. They're not chatzufim. And when you meet someone that has that level of arrogance in their behavior,
Maybe they're
you
not
should
Jewish.
ask the question of whether they're Jew, whether they're a kosher Jew.
Oh wow.
That wild?
Wait, he's not shining
Zing.
because
Zing.
he came into Rabbi Eliezer's speech.
He came into his, like, you want
You're wrong.
to follow the opinion of Chachamim, fine. Ask me permission to read it.
Got it.
Or don't read it in my kavod, in my shul.
No, it's not.
Yeah? But you see something. Now, let's be clear. It does not say specifically that Shemetz Pesul was that specific issue that the person wasn't Jewish at all, but it does say that there was a Pesul there. What could the Pesul be, assuming it wasn't a Pesul of that level? We know also the Gemara tells us, very interesting, we learn about this, and also it finds its expression in Halakha. There's something called the Tish'a Banim, 9 sons. That doesn't mean just someone who has a large family. The 9 sons refer to people who are born of specific types of relations. So what happens in the time of the intimacy, or what the context is of that intimacy, that can imprint something on the child much later on in the child's life. Because at his inception, something was there. Okay?
Isn't that why you're not really supposed to drink when you have intimacy?
So there's 9 different things, and they're called the Tish'a Banim, the 9 sons, like the son of this, and the son of that, and the son of whatever. So each of these things, they represent something that, if in the process itself, I just want to share something unbelievable. There's a rabbi that I know whose parents were not religious. And crazy story, the rabbi's parents came to this country. Anyway, the father started to become more religious. The mother was still abroad until she was able to come over. The father started to become more religious while he was here. Anyway, he got close to the rabbi started teaching him this, that. Anyway, his wife came. The husband said, listen, I've been here for a few months, I've been learning, I'm in a very different place. And the wife said, really? What does that mean? He says, well, I would love it if this, if that. Anyway, she was like, fine. He's like, I'd love it if you go to the mikveh. She went to the mikveh. The first time and the last time she went to the mikveh. But that time she went to the mikveh, she got pregnant. And the son that she had from that one time in her life she went to the mikveh is a rabbi. That's the power. We talk about Tish'a Banim, of Shemetz Shel Pesul. This is who a mother was. That's what she created. She created a child that was brazen in the way that it acted. Okay, I would love to finish, but we're already over time, so we're going to stop here. 25. B2 Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.